The year 2025 will be etched into the memory of a generation, not for a booming recovery or a gentle correction, but for the deafening sound of a bubble finally bursting. They told you it was a supply issue. They told you it was a temporary dip. They told you it was just high interest rates cooling off an overheated market. They lied. Or, perhaps more generously, they simply didn't understand the depth of the rot beneath the surface. Today, we are not speculating about what might happen. We are detailing what is happening right now across the American landscape. You see the headlines screaming about low inventory, but you miss the quiet desperation of price cuts happening in the dark. You hear the soothing words of analysts on cable news, but you miss the panic selling by sophisticated investors who know the game is over. If you are thinking of buying, if you are stretching your budget for that forever home, or if you own a property and believe your equity is safe, you need to stop. Stop everything. Take a deep breath and listen, because what you are about to see is the unvarnished truth presented through 5 undeniable red flags. These aren't theories. These are market indicators that, once triggered, guarantee a financial shockwave that will redefine wealth in this country. And red flag number 1 is already flying high: the inventory freeze and desperate price cuts. For 3 years, the dominant narrative has been one of scarcity. We were told there weren't enough homes. We were told the supply crunch was the only thing propping up prices. But that scarcity was a lie of manipulation, a distortion of data created by a unique one-time phenomenon, the mortgage rate lock-in. Think of the housing market not as a liquid ocean, but as a clogged drain. Over 3/4 of homeowners in America, the ones who currently live in those highly desirable houses, are sitting on mortgages with interest rates below 5%. Many are below 4%, even 3%. To move, to sell their current home and buy a new one, they would have to trade their golden handcuffs for a new mortgage at 7, 8, or even 9%. The cost of that transaction is a financial guillotine. They can't afford it, so they don't move. They are frozen, holding their inventory off the market. This artificially suppresses the supply of good, move-up homes and keeps the median price high, giving the false impression of stability. But this freeze creates a critical point of contrast, and it's where the crash begins. The scarcity story is dead, replaced by the reality of desperate inventory. While the move-up sellers are frozen, a different, more desperate type of inventory is piling up. This is the inventory of stress and speculation. Who is selling right now? They are the small investors whose short-term rental arbitrage schemes collapsed under rising HOA fees and new local regulations. They are the new remote workers who bought their dream home in Boise or Austin at the peak of 2022, only to have their company demand they return to the office, forcing an urgent 6-figure loss. They are the families hit by unexpected job loss, divorce, or medical crisis, who cannot afford the new cost of living coupled with that high-rate mortgage they took out last year. This stress-driven inventory is not priced to move slowly. It is priced to escape. And this is the proof the crash has started: the velocity and depth of price cuts. We are no longer talking about a seller reducing their asking price by $5,000 after 30 days. We are talking about a property listed at $599,000 that has cycled through the market for 90 days, suffering 2 massive, soul-crushing reductions, one to $549,000 and a final frantic one to $485,000, just to attract a single serious offer. That final price cut, the deep, desperate reduction, is the market confessing the original valuation was fantasy. This is happening in every one of the 10 cities we've previously highlighted, from the luxury condos of Naples to the suburban sprawl of Phoenix. This is the seller no longer playing the game of negotiation, but simply trying to liquidate an asset before the bottom falls out completely. The contrast framing here is essential. The media wants you to focus on the small median drop, which is barely noticeable because of the frozen sellers. You need to look at the tails of the distribution. Look at the percentage of homes that have seen a 15% or greater reduction from their original list price. That number is surging past 2008 levels in many metropolitan areas. This is the internal pressure gauge of the housing market blowing a gasket. The market is not slowing down. It's bifurcating. One half is frozen, creating an illusion of stability, and the other half is selling in panic, setting new, far lower comps that will eventually drag the entire median down. The moment the number of desperation-cut homes begins to define the new market price, the floodgates will open, and the frozen homeowners, the ones thinking they'll just wait this out for a couple years,
will realize that the value of their locked-in asset is falling sharply, while the cost of holding it, taxes, insurance, maintenance, keeps rising. This is the painful mechanism of a market reset, and red flag number 1 proves it is underway. The psychological hook is simple: loss aversion. Nobody wants to be the person who buys at the peak, who ignores the warnings and watches their investment evaporate. By detailing the frantic seller activity and the depth of the price cuts, we establish the danger and validate the viewer's existing fear. We tell them, your gut feeling is right. Something is desperately wrong. This immediately gives the video a sense of exclusive, forbidden knowledge, the truth the mainstream media is too afraid or too slow to report. The smooth transition comes from moving from who is selling to who is buying, or more accurately, who is running. That takes us directly to red flag number 2, which focuses on the institutional players. The transition. But the desperate seller is only half the story. The other half involves the people who bought into the boom the earliest, the most aggressively, and with the most money. These are the wolves of the investment world, and when they stop feeding, the crash goes mainstream. That brings us to red flag number 2, the investor exodus and short-term rental flood. Red flag 2, the investor exodus and short-term rental flood. The desperate homeowner, the one with the sub-5% mortgage who just lost their job, is a tragedy. But they are not the driving force of the national correction. The driving force is the investor exodus, a silent stampede of sophisticated capital deciding the game is no longer worth the risk. They are the wolves of the investment world, and when they stop feeding and start selling, the crash goes mainstream and it comes fast. We're talking about two classes of investors who fueled the frenzy from 2020 to 2023, and both are now in a state of rapid liquidation. The first is the institutional investor, Blackstone, Invitation Homes, and other massive firms that spent the last decade creating a single-family rental empire, essentially turning American homeownership into a subscription model. The second is the small-scale speculator, the individual or LLC that leveraged 2 or 3 properties, often as short-term rentals, banking on easy money and endless tourism. Both groups are now facing an unsolvable math problem. The cost of holding the asset is rising faster than the income the asset generates. Let's dissect the institutional side first. These corporations didn't buy homes to live in. They bought cash flow. They bought thousands of homes in the Sunbelt, Atlanta, Phoenix, Tampa, Charlotte, Dallas, the very cities that saw the most aggressive price increases. Their business model was predicated on 3 pillars: constantly rising rents, cheap financing, and the ability to buy at a small discount to the market price. All 3 pillars have been knocked out. Rents in many of those Sunbelt markets have flattened or in some cases fallen sharply as the demand from new remote workers dried up. The cheap financing is gone, replaced by corporate debt that needs to be refinanced at significantly higher rates. And critically, they can no longer buy at a discount because there is no discount to be found without crashing the prices themselves. The smart capital is now looking at its balance sheet and realizing that the paper gains of 2022 are just that, paper. To show their shareholders a return, they must sell. This is the institutional selling frenzy that the media refuses to track clearly. They aren't selling one home at a time on Zillow. They're offloading entire portfolios. 50 homes, 100 homes, 400 homes in bulk deals, often sold quietly to other investment funds or via auction houses specifically designed for massive liquidation events. When a portfolio of 45 single-family rental properties hits the market in one sudden wave, that's not a correction. It's an avalanche of supply targeting the same entry-level and middle-market segments that first-time homebuyers desperately need. The presence of this shadow inventory waiting to be released is a direct signal of deep institutional pessimism, and it has already begun in cities like Rome, Georgia, where major liquidations are now being publicly announced. Now look at the second class of seller, the short-term rental STR speculator. This is where the collapse is most visible and most emotionally impactful in many tourist and coastal areas. Remember our case studies: Naples, Palm Springs, and Myrtle Beach. These markets were saturated with STRs, properties bought specifically to be rented on Airbnb or VRBO. The math was simple and intoxicating. Charge a nightly rate 3 times the long-term rental rate, and you would be rich. But the STR bubble burst first, before the housing bubble. It burst due to 3 critical forces. First, saturation. Too many investors chase the same dream, meaning occupancy rates plunged from the desirable 80% down to a disastrous 40 or 50% in many peak markets. Second, regulation. Local governments responding to residents who couldn't afford to live in their own cities, which your competitor highlighted in San Francisco and Palm Springs, cracked down on STRs, implementing strict permit limits, steep fines, and even outright bans. The cash flow dried up overnight. Third, operating costs. Insurance, HOA fees, and cleaning costs have soared, pushing the operating costs far past the declining revenue. An investor who bought a $500,000 condo with a 6% interest-only loan and was relying on $3,000 a month in STR income is now looking at $1,800 in income, $2,500 in mortgage and fees, and is instantly negative cash flow. They are forced to sell. The listings are already showing this stress. You can spot these properties by the language: short-term rental opportunity, fully furnished, or investment portfolio. They are not selling because traditional owner-occupiers do not want
The hassle, and long-term rental income is not high enough to cover the inflated mortgage they carry. When the number of active short-term rental properties begins to exceed the number of homes for sale in a given zip code, that is red flag number 2, confirming a full-scale investor exodus. This isn't just a handful of units. In many coastal cities, the inventory of former STRs hitting the market is a colossal wave that will crush local prices. The moment the small, highly leveraged speculators start selling in a panic, the crash becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, flooding the market with distressed, newly available inventory. The key contrast here is between the investor's profit motive and the buyer's need for shelter. The investors are ruthless. They cut their losses fast, and their sudden coordinated exit is now pouring cold water over the entire market, proving that the foundation of the boom, speculation, has dissolved. The financial pressure is immediate and brutal, forcing assets onto the market that otherwise would have stayed hidden. But the sellers are not the only ones feeling the squeeze. The buyers, or lack thereof, are being annihilated by the true cost of money. That devastating reality is red flag number 3. Red flag 3, the mortgage rate lock-in and negative affordability index. To understand why you need to stop buying now, you must grasp the true nature of the current market paralysis. It is not an issue of temporary high rates, it is an issue of the affordability annihilation. The market is structurally broken, and red flag number 3 confirms that the fundamental economics of homeownership have failed, locking out the vast majority of potential buyers and guaranteeing a price crash. We touched on the mortgage rate lock-in in red flag 1, but we need to dive into its devastating second-order effects. The lock-in is the supply killer. It keeps current homeowners from selling, but the high rates are the demand killer. They keep new buyers from buying. When supply is artificially low and demand is functionally non-existent, the market enters a dangerous, stagnant equilibrium right before a collapse. Let's look at the math, because the numbers are the sharpest weapons in this crisis. For a first-time homebuyer or anyone looking to upgrade, they are facing interest rates hovering near 7% or 8%. This is not a historical anomaly, it is the new normal for financing. Compare this to the boom years where rates were 3% or less. The difference is crippling. Imagine a theoretical median home price of $400,000. At a 3% rate, your monthly principal and interest payment is roughly $1,686, assuming 20% down. At an 8% rate, that same payment rockets to nearly $2,935. You are paying over $1,200 more per month for the exact same house. This is the central crisis. In the competitors' analysis of Austin and Boise, they correctly noted that home prices surged far above underlying local incomes. The high rates are simply adding jet fuel to that income-to-price mismatch. This is perfectly encapsulated by the Negative Affordability Index. This index measures how much of a typical household's income is required to service the monthly mortgage payment on a median-priced home. Historically, economists consider anything above 30% or 35% to be a significant strain. In major metro areas across the United States today, including the former hotspots like Salt Lake City, Austin, and Boise, that percentage is soaring toward 45% and even 50%. Think about what that means. Half of a family's pre-tax income is required just for the mortgage. That doesn't account for red flag 4, insurance and rising utility costs, property taxes, food, and energy. The only way to make the numbers work is for the price of the asset, the home, to come down dramatically. Until the median home price in Austin drops low enough to bring that monthly payment back down to a sustainable 30% of median income, demand will remain functionally dead. The high rate isn't a cooling mechanism, it's an absolute demand eraser. The psychological trap here is the belief that the Federal Reserve will magically ride to the rescue, slashing rates back to 3% to save the housing market. That belief is costing people thousands. The reality is that the inflation that necessitates these high rates is sticky, driven by structural issues and massive government spending, and it is not going anywhere soon. Waiting for rates to drop means waiting for a systemic economic collapse that would make the current correction look like a sunny day. And here is the deadly trap for the hopeful buyer. Even if rates drop by a point or two, the prices you are fighting against are still inflated by years of stimulus money. The relief will be too small and too slow to fix the damage. The market needs a price correction of at least 25 to 30% just to bring the affordability index back to its stressed pre-pandemic levels. The price must fall because the income and the interest rate are structurally fixed against the buyer. This is the key contrast framing. The market price is a lie. The price being listed today is based on a 2021 financial reality, 3% interest rates, but is being met with a 2025 financial reality, 8% interest rates. This mismatch means the published listing price is not the true value of the home. It is simply a fantasy price the seller is clinging to. The true value, the price a buyer can actually afford to pay with today's borrowing costs, is 25% lower, and the market is being forced to reconcile this difference. This reconciliation happens through the deep, desperate price cuts we discussed in Red Flag 1, which now gain a mathematical justification. They are not random acts of panic, they are the market finally obeying the laws of affordability. The failure of the affordability index is why the construction boom is also stalling. Builders who aggressively purchased land and secured permits during the cheap money era are now stuck. They cannot afford to build new homes and sell them at a loss to meet the buyer's affordability threshold. So construction slows, inventory tightens on the new side, and the overall economic cycle begins to seize up. It is a full-spectrum collapse of the housing supply chain, all rooted in the simple, brutal math of high-interest credit. The most dangerous psychological trigger here is the buyer's FOMO, the fear that they will be priced out forever. This script turns that on its head. By buying now, you are not avoiding being priced out. You are actively guaranteeing yourself a financial disaster by purchasing a 2021 fantasy asset with 2025 money. You must stop buying now and wait for the prices to descend to meet the reality of the interest rate. But the financial squeeze isn't limited to the monthly mortgage payment. It is the hidden, non-negotiable costs of home ownership that are the final layer of pressure, leading us straight into red flag number 4. Red flag 4, exploding insurance and hidden carrying costs. We have established the crisis on 2 fronts: the panicked selling of inflated assets, red flags 1 and 2, and the mathematical impossibility for new buyers to afford them, red flag 3. But the final crippling pressure point on the homeowner's budget is red flag number 4, exploding insurance and hidden carrying costs. This is the slow-moving financial disaster that is eroding the equity of current homeowners, turning a perceived asset into a rapidly draining liability. The high interest rate is an immediate roadblock, but the cost of holding the home is the long-term killer, and this is where the climate crisis and the housing crisis merge. Your competitor was absolutely correct to highlight the insurance catastrophe in places like Cape Coral and Naples, Florida. They mentioned policies doubling or tripling, forcing some homeowners to pay 5 figures annually just for coverage. This is not isolated to Florida. It is a preview of the financial future for every climate-vulnerable region in the country. Wildfire risk is decimating the insurance market across California, Arizona, and the Mountain West, Boise, and Salt Lake City. Flood risk is doing the same across the Gulf Coast and the eastern seaboard, Myrtle Beach. Major national carriers are not simply raising rates, they are pulling out entirely, leaving homeowners with only one, far more expensive, state-backed option of last resort. This isn't just an expense, it's a fundamental change in the risk profile of the property. Think of it this way. When you bought your home, you implicitly bought an insurance policy at a low, predictable rate. That was part of the valuation. If the annual insurance cost suddenly spikes from $3,000 to $10,000, that $7,000 difference is a direct, immediate hit to your disposable income. It acts exactly like a mortgage rate hike, except it is non-negotiable. For a buyer to afford that new higher fixed cost, the original purchase price of the home must drop by tens of thousands of dollars just to balance the equation. This is a quiet, systemic devaluation of homes in high-risk zones, and it is a guaranteed driver of the crash. The price you pay for the house is only one line item. The price you pay for the right to own the house is becoming unsustainable. Beyond insurance, we have the secondary hidden costs that are swelling household budgets. Your competitor noted the extreme heat in Phoenix and the water scarcity concerns in Las Vegas and Austin. These are not abstract environmental debates, they are line items on a utility bill. When triple-digit temperatures persist for months, the necessary cost of running air conditioning for survival, not comfort, skyrockets. Power companies, citing increased demand and infrastructure strain, raise rates. Water districts impose restrictions and fines. The once touted low-cost Sunbelt living is becoming a financial mirage. Investors who purchased properties based on low carrying costs are now discovering that the fixed costs are nothing but. The HOA fees, taxes, and maintenance for the new build communities on the outskirts of Phoenix or Boise were set in a different economic climate. Now, with amenities sitting underused and costs rising, HOAs are forced to hit residents with massive, unexpected special assessments. These one-time bills for seawall reinforcement, roof replacement, or utility upgrades. This is cash being pulled directly from the homeowner's savings, eliminating the cushion they need to weather the economic storm. The psychological impact of Red Flag 4 is the loss of financial predictability. Homeownership is supposed to be the stable foundation of the American dream. But when your insurance premium can double without warning, when your power bill becomes a crisis, and when a special assessment wipes out your emergency fund, that stability evaporates. You feel trapped. This trap forces people who might have ridden out a temporary price dip to sell out of necessity because the operational costs are literally greater than their budget allows. This panic selling, fueled not by high rates but by high utility and insurance costs, reinforces the inventory flood of red flag 1 and pushes the median price down further. The contrast framing here is between the marketing of the American dream and the reality of its expense. The marketing promises low-cost living in the sun. The reality delivers crippling insurance bills and non-negotiable climate adaptation costs. This crisis of carrying costs makes every single transaction in high-risk zones a gamble, one that serious buyers are increasingly unwilling to take. The crash has started because the hidden financial anchors, insurance and utilities, are dragging the value of the home down regardless of what the mortgage rate does. This leads us directly to the final, most chilling piece of evidence that proves the housing collapse is not coming but is already here. The truth about the supply lurking in the shadows.
Red flag 5, the shadow inventory of foreclosures. And conclusion. The final, chilling piece of evidence that proves the crash is not coming, but is already underway, is red flag number 5, the shadow inventory of foreclosures. The official numbers on foreclosures are being artificially suppressed. Banks, still recovering from the trauma of 2008, do not want to flood the market and guarantee a full-scale panic. They are holding back the wave. The proof lies in the massive, surging rise of seriously delinquent mortgages, loans 90 days or more past due. This is the hidden supply, the tens of thousands of homes that have already failed financially but haven't yet been processed into the public foreclosure listings. This inventory is sitting on the balance sheets of lenders, waiting for the moment they decide they can no longer carry the risk. When the investor panic, red flag 2, and the high carrying costs, red flag 4, overwhelm the market, the banks will be forced to liquidate this shadow inventory to survive. That final, forced liquidation will be the decisive blow, the moment the crash goes from correction to catastrophe. This is why you must stop buying now. The market you see is a lie, propped up by frozen homeowners and hidden bank debt. The true market is 25% lower and drowning in risk. Wait for the shadow inventory to surface, wait for prices to meet affordability, and protect your capital. Your future wealth depends on making careful, informed decisions now.